They'll destroy everything in the physical world, but the one thing they're really talented at is occupying the moral high ground in an unjustified way, is flying into such a hysterical frenzy that they intimidate people into repeating their slogans. And I do think if we're going to reclaim our humanity from people who would turn us into slaves, one of the first things we need to say is, I control what I think and what I say. I can have my own opinions. And by the way, I don't have to have an opinion. I don't have an opinion on that. It's not important to me. It's okay to say that. Your priorities don't have to be mine. Mine don't have to be yours. And if they do, then I'm no longer a free person. I'm a slave. You consider me subhuman. I'm like your dog. You can tell me what to care about, what to eat. But as a free man, no, I don't have to share your priorities. I would never pretend to be the voice of the working class. And I feel like we're in a moment where things are moving south at high speed.
Yes.
Particularly the demographic replacement, American citizens being replaced by foreigners who are being encouraged to go into the military. Let's hand them, we don't know who they are. They don't know anything about the United States. Where do you think that's going? I don't understand this weird externalizing process of emotion that happens for a lot of well-educated Americans, where they're not mad about what's happening around them. They're mad about what's happening in some country they've never been to. It's like, what is that? What is that?
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say is, I've noticed that a lot of the most passionate sort of advocates for this idea that, the only problems are abroad and we need to spend all of our money on those problems are people with very weird and hollow personal lives. I'm sorry, I don't want to be mean. I'm just being honest. Very dishonest personal lives, creepy personal lives, unsettled inside. Like a normal person in this and all countries wants, like, I want to have dinner with my wife and play with my dogs and see my kids grow up and have grandchildren, and I want my neighborhood to be safe, and I want my friends to be happy, and I want you know what I mean? Like those are the kind of core and concerns for most people. The one thing they're really good at, they're not good at engineering or building anything or even preserving what our ancestors handed us in New York City, for example. My motive comes from and I actually now live in a working class area and I love the people there, but that's not my world. I'm motivated by my loathing of the people in charge. The one thing I know a lot about are the people who populate the ruling class, because I spent my whole life with them. I'm not against ruling classes. Every society has one. Someone's got to be in charge. There's always an elect that runs everything. They're always Brahmins, okay? Always, and there always will be. So I'm not against it. I'm not a populist in that sense. I'm just against incompetent, selfish, nasty, stupid people being in charge. And that's exactly who we have. And I'm so mad about it because I know exactly who they are. And I know that. And I know them all. And I know I live next to them my whole life, 35 years in DC. So it's like, I'm not fooled by that. Oh, well, I went to Harvard and, and then HBS, and I'm at I spoke at Aspen this summer. It's like, I know how mediocre that is because I've been around it my whole life. So I'm just not impressed. I don't want anything from them at all. I'm not rich. I have enough. So it's like, I'm just in this weird position where I know exactly who they are. I don't want their stupid little merit badges. I couldn't have more contempt for them. And I'm old enough now that, like, why not just say it?
Right.
And I am. And I just don't care. I'm going to keep saying it. I think it's really important to create a hierarchy of importance just in life and in public policy and just every sphere of life. Like, decide what's most important, what do I do first? And my smartest friend, my wisest friend, who's been really successful, just because he's wise, always says, look, it comes down to food, water, energy. The countries rise and fall on the basis of food, water, energy. And every time he talks like that, he talks in terms of fundamentals, like what actually matters. And so I just think if you want to make the country better, focus on the big things. Let's make sure the power grid works. Let's make sure the military is not politicized and used against the population. Like, let's just start there. And those are the things that conservatives just miss because they're off on all this other stuff. No.
Our economy is dominated by monopolies, but the greatest of all monopolies is the federal monopoly, which oversees and controls all the other monopolies. So it's like, it's really substantially about the money. It's not ideological, it's about the money. And if someone controls the federal government, I mean, at this point, it's the most powerful organization in human history. Like, it's kind of hard to fight that. And in the case of Trump, I know the answer there. They raided Mar-a-Lago. They indicted him on charges. Like, and I felt that in myself too. Even I was like, come on. Like, whatever you think of Trump. And I agreed with his immigration views. I really like Trump personally. I think he's hilarious and interesting, which he is. But it's like, okay, a lot of people in this country, let's get some, let's have at very least, like, let's have a real debate. The second they raided Mar-a-Lago on a documents charge, as someone from DC, I was like, I know a lot about classification and all that stuff, and been around it a lot. That's so absurd that I was like, now it's not about Trump. It's about our system continuing. Like, if you can take out a presidential candidate on a fake charge, use the justice system to take the guy out of the race, then we don't have a representative democracy anymore. And I think a lot of Republican voters felt that way. If they hadn't indicted him, I'm not sure he would be the nominee. It's just crazy this is happening in front of all of us. And then it becomes like, at that point, it's not about Joe Biden. It's not about Donald Trump. It's about preserving a system which has worked, not perfectly, but pretty freaking well for 250 years. I know you don't like Trump, I get it. Let's not destroy that system. Like, we can handle another 4 years of Trump. I think we can, so I'll calm down. What we can't handle is a country whose political system is run by the Justice Department. Like, that is just, you're freaking Ecuador at that point. You can't have censorship in a democracy, by definition. Here's how it works. The people rule, they vote for representatives to carry their agenda to the capital city and get it enacted. That's how they're in charge. And then every few years, they get to reassess the performance of those people in an election. In order to do that, they need access, unfettered access to information. And no one, particularly not people who are already in power, is allowed to tell them what information they can have. They have to have all information that they want. Whether the people in charge want it or don't want it, or think it's true or think it's false, it doesn't matter. And the second you don't have that, you don't have a democracy. It's not a free election, period. And that's very clear in other countries, I guess, but it's not clear here. So, but I would say it's this election that, I mean, it took me a while to come to this, but it's this election that's the referendum on democracy. Biden is senile. He's literally senile. He can't talk. He can't walk. The whole world knows that. Leave our borders. People are, everybody in the world knows it. Like, who would vote for a senile man? He literally can't talk. And nobody I've ever met thinks he's running the US government, because he's not. And I guess it shows how dumb I am, because they've been doing that for many years. I mean, the guy who took out Mossadegh lived on my street. One of the Roosevelt CIA officer. So, I mean, again, I grew up around this stuff, but I never reached the obvious conclusion, which is that if the US government subverts democracy in other countries in the name of democracy, it will over time subvert democracy in my country. Why wouldn't it? That is, the corruption is like core. It's at the root of it. No country has freedom of speech other than us. Canada doesn't have it. Great Britain definitely doesn't have it. France, Netherlands, these are countries I spend a lot of time in. And Russia certainly doesn't have it. So that's why I don't live there. I'm just saying our sanctions don't work. That's all I was saying. And we don't have to live like animals. We can live with dignity. Even the Russians can do it. That's kind of what I was saying. And no, it's not a feature of dictatorship. That's the most, I think, discouraging and most dishonest line by people like Jon Stewart, who really are trying to prepare the population for accepting a lot less. Everyone's afraid in this country they're going to be shut down by the tech oligarchs, or have the FBI show up at their houses, or go to jail. And people are legit afraid of that in the United States. And my feeling is, so? Like, show a little courage. Like, what is it worth to you for your grandchildren to live in a free, prosperous country? It should be worth more than your comfort. That's how I feel. But I know press freedom when I see it. I try to practice it, which is saying what you think is true, correcting yourself when you've been shown to be wrong, as I have many times, being as honest as you can be all the time, and not being afraid. And those are wholly absent in my country, wholly absent. People are afraid in the news business. I would know, since I spent my life working there, and they're afraid to tell the truth. They're under an enormous amount of pressure, and a lot of them have little kids and mortgages. I've been there. So I have sympathy, but they go along with things like you are not allowed, if you stand up at any cable channel in the United States and say, wait a second, obviously being thrown into prison is much worse than losing your job. I've been fired a number of times for saying what I think, by the way. And it's fine. I've enjoyed it. I don't mind being fired. I've always become a better person after it happened. But it is one measurement of freedom. If you have the theoretical right to do something, but no practical ability to do it, do you have the right to do it? And the answer is not really, actually. I've been in cable news for 9 years. So before 2004, we would say something on television and then it would be lost. Like people could claim they heard it, but you'd have to go to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville archives to get it. Suddenly, everything we said would live forever on the internet, which is good, by the way. It's not bad, but it was a big change for me. And I just couldn't believe how widely that was discussed at the time, because I thought he was not an interesting person. I think he's obviously a very unhappy person. I just didn't take him seriously then, and I don't now. But so anyway, that was it. It was a smaller thing in my life at the time than other people imagined. I think that, and I see this a lot, not only on the left, but people who believe that whatever political debate they're engaged in is the most important debate in the world. And so they bring an emotional intensity to those debates, and they're inevitably disappointed because no eternal question is solved politically. So they're kind of on the wrong path, right? And they're doomed to frustration. If they believe that, and many do, he certainly does, that whatever the issue is, so, Clarence Thomas should not be a Supreme Court justice. And the implication is, well, if someone else is a Supreme Court justice, we'll live in a fair and happy society. But that's just not, it's a false promise. So I think that people who bring that level of intensity to politics are by definition bitter, by definition disappointed, bitter in the way that disappointed people are. And that the real questions are like, what happens when you die? And how do the people around you feel about you? Those are not the only questions in life, but they're certainly the most important ones. And if we're spending a disproportionate amount of time on who gets elected to some office, not that it's irrelevant, it is relevant, but it's not the eternal question. And so I feel like he's not the only kind of bitter, silly person in Washington or in its orbit. There are many, and a lot of them are Republicans. So, but I just thought it was ironic. I mean, everything's ironic to me, but like being called a Russia sympathizer by a guy who calls himself Boris. Like that just made me laugh. No one else has ever laughed at that. Boris Johnson's real name is not Boris, as you know. He calls himself Boris. It's his middle name. The measure to me is, are you taking positions that are unpopular with the most powerful people in the world, and how often are you doing it? It's super simple. Not for its own sake, but do you feel free enough to say, to the consensus, I disagree? And if you don't, then you're just another toady. That's my view.